Canada is considering an unprecedented move to cut electricity and oil exports to the U.S. in response to new tariffs imposed by the U.S. government, including a 25% tariff on Canadian imports, including energy. This decision could have significant negative effects on Canada's economy, especially in sectors like automobile manufacturing, steel production, and energy. Ontario, one of Canada's largest industrial hubs, is contemplating reducing electricity supply to U.S. states that depend heavily on Canadian energy, which could lead to higher electricity prices, potential rolling blackouts, and disruptions for industries reliant on Canadian energy. The U.S. imports nearly 40 terawatt-hours of electricity from Canada each year, and states like New York, Michigan, and Minnesota rely on this supply. Additionally, the U.S. imports 4 million barrels of oil per day from Canada, making up 67% of total U.S. oil imports. If Canada cuts oil exports, the U.S. energy market could face challenges. Canada is also considering limiting exports of natural gas and rare earth minerals critical to the U.S. economy. With the completion of the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline in 2024, Canada can now export oil to non-U.S. markets, particularly in Asia. If trade tensions escalate, Canada may redirect its exports, leaving the U.S. scrambling for alternative energy sources. While the U.S. has large domestic energy reserves, many American refineries are designed to process Canada's heavier crude oil, and switching to other suppliers would not be an easy fix. Additionally, natural gas imports from Canada remain vital for heating and industrial use, especially in the Midwest and Northeast. Losing Canada's power exports could cause regional instability in the U.S. grid, and replacing this energy with domestic or imported alternatives would likely drive up prices, affecting businesses and households. Canada's move caught the Trump administration off guard, as U.S.-Canada trade is worth over $800 billion annually, and any disruption could send shockwaves through the economy. Instead of backing down, Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs, expanded new markets, and strengthened ties with the European Union to protect its economic interests, which could have long-term global economic consequences. Triggered an intense backlash from America's closest economic allies, experts warned that these policies could disrupt vital supply chains, drive up fuel and consumer prices, and hurt not just Canada but also American businesses and consumers. You may already feel the impact: higher fuel prices, increased production costs, and a growing risk of job losses. What's even more concerning is that this could spiral into a dangerous cycle of economic retaliation between major economies. But why did the Trump administration take this gamble, and did they underestimate Canada's response? Canada doesn't back down, it hits back hard. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded swiftly, calling the U.S. tariffs completely unjustified and warning that they could hurt both nations. Immediately, Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods of equal value, targeting steel, aluminum, and key agricultural products such as beef, dairy, and fresh produce. But that was just the beginning. Canada also moved aggressively to diversify its trade partnerships, signing new agreements with Europe and Asian nations like Indonesia and Ecuador to reduce its dependence on the U.S. market. This strategy not only strengthens Canada's economy but also puts the U.S. in a difficult position, losing a key trade partner right at its doorstep. And Canada wasn't stopping there, it had another major move in store, a long-term strategy that could challenge America's dominance in critical industries. Canada and the EU formed a strategic minerals alliance, challenging China. Beyond trade, Canada and the EU have joined forces in a crucial sector, securing the supply chain for strategic minerals such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel, essential materials for electric vehicle batteries, renewable energy, and high-tech industries. Right now, China dominates this market, controlling over 90% of the global supply, but now Canada and the EU are building an independent supply chain, reducing reliance on Beijing. This move not only strengthens economic security but also sends a clear warning to the U.S. Without a smart trade strategy, Washington could be left behind in the race for the energy industry of the future. Trump's foreign policy concerns Europe, pushing for military independence, but trade is not the only concern. European leaders are increasingly worried about Donald Trump's unpredictable foreign policies. After the US held secret negotiations with Russia over Ukraine without involving European allies, many nations felt sidelined, pushing the EU to strengthen its independent defense strategy, reducing reliance on NATO, which is led by the US. France has organized high-level meetings to expand military cooperation, strengthen defense supply chains, and increase defense spending. Europe and Canada are now shaping a new strategic landscape, one that is no longer dependent on Washington's decisions. The EU abandons US gas and chooses Canada, a shock to the US economy. Europe is making a decision that could reshape the global energy market by turning away from the US, their biggest natural gas supplier, and looking to Canada instead. But what happened? Why is the US, one of the world's leading energy exporters, losing such an important customer? Has Europe truly found a better alternative, or is this a geopolitical strategy? How will this shift impact the US economy? Let's explore this critical development. Why is Europe abandoning US gas? It all started with the war between Russia and Ukraine. As the EU imposed sanctions on Russia, Moscow's gas supply dropped drastically, plunging the region into an unprecedented energy crisis. Initially, the US emerged as a savior, providing liquefied natural gas, LNG, in large quantities, helping Europe survive a harsh winter. But then problems arose. US gas prices were too high. European businesses and governments quickly realized they were paying a premium for American LNG, significantly above global market rates. Tough US trade policies made the EU feel that Washington was using energy as a political tool, imposing strict trading conditions. Uncertainty in US energy policy, with each administration change, made the US an unreliable partner in Europe's long-term energy security. The result? The EU began looking for a new supplier, one with more competitive prices, stability, and less political interference. That's when Canada entered the picture. Why did Canada become Europe's new choice? Why did the EU choose Canada over other options? First, vast natural resources. Canada possesses some of the world's largest reserves of oil, gas, and critical minerals. Second, stable trade relations with Europe. Unlike the US, where trade policies shift depending on the administration, Canada has maintained long-term cooperative economic ties with the EU. Third, a strong focus on clean energy. The EU isn't just looking for gas, it's investing in a greener future. Canada is a leader in renewable energy, including wind, solar, and hydroelectric power. The country also has abundant lithium, cobalt, and nickel reserves, essential materials for EV battery production. While the US remains heavily dependent on fossil fuels, Canada is building a more sustainable energy system, aligning with Europe's long-term vision. With these advantages, it's no surprise that the EU is pivoting to Canada. But what does this mean for the US? The US faces the risk of losing its market. Europe's shift away from the US will have serious economic consequences for America. First, the US is losing a major export market. The EU was the largest buyer of American LNG. If European demand shifts to Canada, US energy companies could lose billions of dollars in annual revenue. Second, the US auto industry is at risk. Europe isn't just buying gas, it's securing resources for its electric vehicle (EV) industry. Canada provides lithium and cobalt, critical minerals for EV batteries, while the US struggles with environmental regulations that limit mining operations. The EU is signing multiple agreements with Canada, reducing its reliance on US supplies. Third, the decline of US geopolitical influence. For years, the US used energy exports as a strategic tool to exert influence over allies. If Europe finds a reliable alternative, Washington's leverage in global negotiations will weaken. Can the US take action to reclaim its market, or will it continue to lose ground? The race isn't over yet. Europe's decision to choose Canada over the US is more than just a trade shift, it's a geopolitical turning point. Will the US allow Canada to take over, or will it introduce new policies to win back the European market? Now, what will the US do next? US-Canada-Mexico trade tensions. Could the US automotive industry collapse? Car prices in the US could soon skyrocket by $1,000 to $3,000, not due to a global crisis or supply shortage, but because of a new import tariff policy threatened by the Trump administration. Is this truly a strategy to protect American industry, or a risky move that could trigger economic instability? As Canada and Mexico prepare to retaliate, who will suffer the most? Businesses, workers, or American consumers? Let's dive into the real impact of the America First policy and why it could become the greatest threat to the U.S. automotive industry. Why impose auto tariffs now? The first question is why the Trump administration is pushing these tariffs at this moment. The answer lies in the familiar strategy, America First. More than just a slogan, it forms the foundation of a series of protectionist trade policies aimed at boosting domestic manufacturing, investments, reducing reliance on foreign goods, and increasing job opportunities for American workers. The focus is to protect and strengthen key domestic industries, particularly steel and aluminum, essential materials for car manufacturing. From Trump's perspective, raising import tariffs would encourage companies to invest and produce within the U.S., cut dependency on international suppliers, and generate more employment for American workers. However, while the goal is to boost local production, the reality is that the U.S. automotive industry heavily relies on international supply chains, particularly from Canada, Mexico, and Asian countries. Disrupting this supply network not only raises production costs but also threatens the ability of American car manufacturers to maintain output and stay globally competitive. Does building tariff walls truly protect the economy, or will it just burden American businesses and consumers with higher costs? The critical role of Canada and Mexico in the U.S. supply chain. Did you know that millions of cars manufactured in the U.S. rely on parts produced in Canada and Mexico? Specifically, these neighboring countries supply essential components like engines and transmissions from factories in Mexico, and raw steel and aluminum from industrial centers in